The fluorescent lights of Meridian National Bank buzzed overhead, matching the dull throbbing behind my eyes as I shifted my weight from one aching foot to the other. 3 night shifts in a row at St. Mary's Hospital had left me running on fumes, but my student loan payment was 3 days overdue, and my landlord was threatening eviction if I missed rent again. I rehearsed my speech silently, preparing to beg the loan officer for yet another extension. This was becoming a monthly ritual, one more humiliation in the life of a struggling nurse with 6 figures of debt and a paycheck that barely covered essentials. The marble floor echoed with Friday afternoon impatience, business people checking watches, tellers moving with practiced efficiency, everyone eager to start their weekends while I was here contemplating financial ruin. I tugged nervously at my ponytail, breathing in the sterile smell of money and desperation that seemed to permeate the air. The line inched forward, each step bringing me closer to the moment of truth. Would they give me more time, or would this be the day my precarious house of cards finally collapsed? A soft voice broke through my anxiety spiral. A woman behind me, pretty but disheveled, her eyes wide with that particular brand of new mother panic, gestured to the sleeping infant nestled against her chest in a blue cotton carrier. She asked if I could hold him just for a moment while she found his pacifier in her overflowing diaper bag. Something about her seemed off, too well dressed for her frazzled demeanor, her expensive perfume incongruous with her chipped nail polish and the wild look in her eyes. But working in pediatrics had made holding babies second nature to me, so I nodded and carefully took the sleeping bundle. He was beautiful, maybe 6 months old, with thick dark lashes and a perfect bow of a mouth. He smelled of baby powder and that indescribable sweet scent that all infants seem to have. His weight felt natural in my arms, comforting even, a momentary distraction from my own problems. I expected the woman to quickly dig through her bag and reclaim her child. But minutes passed as she rummaged, moving slightly away, glancing repeatedly at the bank entrance. The baby stirred against me, his tiny fingers curling reflexively around mine when I adjusted his blanket. His grasp was surprisingly strong, trusting, and something protective stirred inside me. I was about to ask the woman if she needed help when the baby opened his eyes, revealing irises so dark blue they were almost black, oddly alert and solemn for one so young. Our gazes locked for one profound moment before the front doors of the bank burst open with a crash that shattered the mundane afternoon into chaos, and 3 masked men rushed in with raised weapons. The woman who had handed me her child was nowhere to be seen. And now please stop and subscribe to my channel. Every subscriber brings me closer to 1,000, which helps me keep these stories alive and coming your way. If you're enjoying this video, don't forget to like it and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. It's always amazing to see how far these tales travel across the world. Now let's continue. The world condensed to a single point of focus as the masked men stormed through the bank doors, black tactical gear and raised weapons transforming the mundane Friday afternoon into a nightmare. "Everyone get on the ground now, this is a robbery," the leader bellowed, his voice distorted behind a black ski mask. My body reacted before my mind could process what was happening, curling protectively around the infant in my arms as I dropped to my knees. The baby startled awake, his tiny body tensing against mine, but miraculously, he made no sound. "Shh, it's okay, I've got you," I whispered against his downy head, my heartbeat thundering in my ears as screams erupted around us. The security alarm began its piercing wail. The fluorescent lights suddenly harsh and exposing as they reflected off the polished marble floor where bank customers and employees now lay prone, hands covering their heads. I frantically scanned the room for the baby's mother, but she was nowhere to be seen. Had she made it to the restroom? Had she somehow slipped out a back exit? The realization that I was alone with a stranger's child during an armed robbery sent cold terror washing through me. I pressed my cheek against the baby's head, feeling his warmth, smelling that innocent newness that contrasted so violently with the chaos surrounding us. "Move to the wall, all of you," one robber shouted, gesturing with his weapon toward the east side of the bank where there were no windows. I rose shakily, legs nearly buckling beneath me as I shuffled sideways, never turning my back on the armed men, my body a human shield for the precious bundle against my chest. The baby remained eerily quiet, as if sensing the danger, his tiny fingers clutching the fabric of my shirt. My nursing instincts took over, checking his breathing, making sure he wasn't being crushed against me, automatically rocking in the subtle way that soothes infants, even as my own mind screamed in panic. Around us, people sobbed quietly. A woman hyperventilated nearby. Someone was praying in urgent whispers. The robbers moved with military precision, one guarding the hostages, one at the door, the leader approaching the tellers with duffel bags. I noticed their eyes lingering on me, or more specifically, on the baby. Something in their attention felt targeted, calculated, different from the impersonal threat directed at the other hostages. A terrible suspicion began forming in my mind as I realized the woman had handed me her baby mere moments before the robbery began. This was no coincidence. Someone had planned for me to be holding this child when these men arrived, and I had no idea why. All I knew with absolute certainty was that this baby was now my responsibility, and I would protect him with everything I had. I tightened my embrace around him, feeling his heart flutter against mine like a trapped bird as the lead robber turned his attention directly toward us. The lead robber barked orders at his accomplices, dividing the 20 or so hostages into smaller groups. "Move the tellers behind the counter, the customers against that wall," he commanded, gesturing with his weapon. "But you, the one with the baby," he pointed directly at me, his eyes cold through the slits in his mask. "You stay right where I can see you." I clutched the infant closer to my chest, feeling sickeningly exposed under his scrutiny, yet fiercely determined not to show fear. "Please, he's just a baby," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "His mother went to the bathroom right before you came in." The robber tilted his head slightly, studying me for several uncomfortable seconds before directing me to a chair near the center of the bank floor. "I want you where everyone can see you," he said, something calculating in his tone that made my skin crawl. I sat carefully, arranging the baby in my lap, his warm weight both a comfort and a terrible responsibility. Around us, the other hostages were being systematically searched, their phones and valuables collected in a black duffel bag. The blinds were drawn with mechanical precision, plunging the bank into an artificial twilight broken only by the harsh overhead lights. No one looked at me directly, their eyes skittering away whenever our gazes met, as if my visibility marked me as somehow contagious. The air felt thick with fear, breathing it in coated my lungs with dread. The baby stirred against me, making small rooting movements with his mouth. He would be hungry soon. How long had it been since he was fed? Where was his mother? A horrible thought began forming in my mind, taking root like a poisonous weed. What if she wasn't coming back? The timing was too perfect, her disappearance too convenient. Had she known what was about to happen? Had she deliberately passed her child to a stranger moments before an armed robbery? The baby whimpered softly, and I instinctively began to rock, the subtle motion calming him back to quietude. The lead robber paced near us, speaking in terse sentences into a phone. "I need more time," he growled, his eyes flicking toward me and the baby with unsettling frequency. "Tell them we have special packages." I felt sick as understanding dawned. We weren't just hostages. The baby and I were bargaining chips, leverage for whatever these men truly wanted. One of the other robbers approached, leaning close to whisper to his leader. They both turned to stare at me, then at the bathrooms, which another accomplice was now checking systematically. "The woman's gone," the third man reported, returning from the restrooms. Back exit was forced open. I held my breath as the leader stalked toward me, looming over where I sat cradling the increasingly restless infant. "Where is she?" he demanded, crouching to my eye level. "I don't know," I whispered truthfully, heart hammering so violently I feared it might wake the baby. But as his dark eyes bored into mine through his mask, I realized with absolute clarity that this was no ordinary bank robbery. Somehow, this tiny innocent child in my arms was what they had come for. Red and blue lights pulsed through the cracks in the drawn blinds, casting an eerie strobe effect across the bank's marble floor, where we hostages sat in tense silence. Police bullhorns occasionally crackled outside, demanding communication, promising negotiation, their words hollow against the reality of our captivity. An hour had crawled by with excruciating slowness, each minute stretching like elastic about to snap. The baby in my arms had begun to fuss, making soft, hungry sounds that threatened to escalate into full cries. I searched through the diaper bag the woman had left, finding a pre-made bottle that I offered him gratefully, watching his tiny mouth latch on with desperate hunger. Still no sign of the mother. The lead robber paced increasingly erratic patterns across the floor, checking his watch, muttering to his accomplices, his agitation spreading through the room like a virus. Other hostages shifted uncomfortably, some quietly weeping, others staring vacantly at nothing, all of us pretending we couldn't see the weapons trained casually in our direction. A young woman in a bank teller's uniform had been positioned near me after the hostages were rearranged. She leaned slightly closer as the baby drank, her voice barely audible even in the tense quiet. "I saw her," she whispered, eyes darting toward the armed men. "The woman who gave you her baby. She slipped through the back exit right before they came in. She knew." My suspicions crystallized into certainty, a cold weight settling in my stomach as I looked down at the innocent face of the child in my arms. He had been abandoned deliberately, handed to me in a calculated move that had placed us both at the center of whatever dangerous game was unfolding. The diaper bag suddenly seemed like more than just baby supplies. It was a burden of unknown responsibility thrust upon me without consent. I discreetly examined the expensive carrier, noting its designer label, the high quality of the baby's clothes. This was no ordinary child from an ordinary family. Who would leave their baby with a stranger during a robbery? Who could coordinate such timing? The robbers had been looking specifically for the mother, becoming increasingly frustrated at her absence. Were they working together or against each other? The baby finished his bottle, his dark blue eyes staring up at me with a trust I hadn't earned, but now felt desperate to deserve. I shifted him to my shoulder, patting gently until he released a small burp. His tiny hand curled around my finger with that remarkable infant strength that always squeezed my heart. The lead robber approached us again, his mask not concealing the growing desperation in his eyes. His accomplice whispered something that made him glance sharply at his watch. "Where's the mother?" he demanded again. This time loud enough for everyone to hear. The other hostages visibly tensed, their eyes lowering, bodies shrinking as if trying to disappear. "She left me with him and never came back," I said, meeting his gaze directly, summoning every ounce of courage I possessed. "Tell me what's really happening here. Who are you looking for?" The lead robber snatched a phone from behind the teller counter, punching in numbers with aggressive precision before barking demands into the receiver. His voice echoed through the now stifling bank, the closed blinds and sealed doors trapping both heat and fear inside with suffocating efficiency. "We have a mother and baby in here," he announced, staring directly at me as he spoke. "Clock is ticking on our demands." The words sent a surge of indignation coursing through me. I wasn't this baby's mother, but in this moment, I was all he had, and the robber's casual exploitation of our vulnerability ignited something fierce within me. The infant sensed the tension, his small face crumpling before releasing a piercing wail that reverberated off the marble surfaces. I bounced him gently, whispering soothing nonsense against his temple, feeling his soft skin dampen with sweat in the increasingly hot bank. Around us, the other hostages shifted uncomfortably, dehydration and fear making them restless. A middle-aged man loosened his tie with trembling fingers. A young woman quietly wept, makeup trailing dark rivulets down her cheeks. The robbers conferred in harsh whispers, their eyes continually darting to the windows where police presence had multiplied, then back to me and the baby with calculating intensity. The lead robber ended his call with a curse, stalking toward me with purpose. The child in my arms whimpered, his tiny body tense against mine. "Need to move you where they can see you better," he growled, grabbing my upper arm and pulling me roughly toward the front of the bank. I resisted instinctively, turning to shield the baby from his reach. "Let go of me," I hissed, surprising myself with the venom in my voice. "If you want my cooperation, you ask properly. He's already upset and manhandling us won't help your negotiations." The robber froze, momentarily startled by my defiance, then slowly released my arm. His eyes narrowed through the mask, reassessing me with newfound wariness. "Fine," he said. "Please move to the front window so our friends outside can see exactly what they're dealing with." I complied with deliberate slowness. Each step measured and controlled, refusing to be rushed or frightened into stumbling. The baby had settled against me, his weight growing heavier as exhaustion pulled him toward sleep despite the chaos. I positioned myself where directed, standing tall despite my trembling knees. Through gaps in the blinds, I could see the police barricade, news vans gathering beyond, faces turned toward the bank with expressions ranging from professional focus to morbid fascination. I wondered if anyone was looking specifically for this child, if whoever had orchestrated his abandonment was watching now. The lead robber returned to the phone, gesturing toward me as he spoke. "I am not just a prop in your performance," I thought fiercely, cradling the innocent life that had been entrusted to me through either desperation or calculation. Whatever game was being played here, I was no longer merely a pawn, but a player, and I would do whatever necessary to ensure this baby survived it. Behind the blinds, I could see the situation outside the bank transforming from police response into full-blown media circus. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes extending skyward like mechanical flowers seeking signal instead of sun. Camera crews jostled for position behind police barricades, their lenses trained on our prison of marble and glass. I caught fragments of a reporter's voice through the window, her carefully modulated professional tone carrying despite the distance. The situation remains tense with reports of at least one infant among the hostages. My stomach lurched at the realization that the baby and I had become breaking news, our ordeal broadcast into thousands of living rooms across the city. The lead robber seemed to revel in the attention, positioning me periodically near gaps in the blinds where cameras could glimpse us, using our visibility to add pressure to his increasingly frantic negotiations. The baby had settled against my shoulder, exhaustion finally overcoming fear as he drifted into uneasy sleep. I shifted him carefully, my arms aching from hours of holding him, but unwilling to set him down for even a moment. Through my limited view of the outside world, I watched the gathering crowd with its mix of professional intensity and morbid fascination. Police strategized in tight clusters, SWAT team members positioned themselves with methodical precision, onlookers recorded with cell phones raised high above heads. A fleet of unmarked black SUVs arrived with subtle authority, parking at strategic points around the perimeter. From one emerged a strikingly handsome man in his late 20s, his tailored suit and commanding presence parting the crowd without visible effort. Even from a distance, I could see his sharp jawline, the precise cut of his dark hair, the way others deferred to him despite the police hierarchy already established. He moved with contained power, speaking briefly to an officer who immediately directed him to what appeared to be the command center. Something about his arrival changed the energy outside, a new current of purpose electrifying the previously stagnant standoff. I watched him scan the bank facade with laser focus until his gaze seemed to lock directly onto my position. Though logically I knew he couldn't see me clearly through the partially closed blinds, an inexplicable chill raced down my spine at the intensity of his attention. The baby stirred against me as if sensing the shift, his tiny fingers clutching my shirt more tightly. The lead robber noticed my attention directed outside and roughly yanked the blinds closed, cutting off my view. But that brief connection had registered something important. The man in the expensive suit hadn't been looking at the bank or the hostage situation with professional detachment or voyeuristic interest. He had been looking with shocked recognition, and somehow I knew with bone-deep certainty that his presence had everything to do with the child in my arms. While I remained trapped inside the bank, events were unfolding elsewhere in the city that would dramatically alter my fate, though I wouldn't learn the full details until much later. In a luxury penthouse 40 floors above the city's exclusive financial district, Dominic Russo stood before a wall of floor-to-ceiling windows, one hand pressed against the glass as he stared at the breaking news broadcast on a sleek television screen mounted on the opposite wall. His chiseled features, which had graced the covers of business magazines celebrating his meteoric rise in real estate development, were frozen in an expression of stunned recognition as the camera briefly captured my face and the baby in my arms through the bank's partially open blinds. "That's Alessandro's son," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "My brother's missing child." The crystal tumbler of aged whiskey in his other hand trembled slightly, the only visible crack in his otherwise perfect composure. Behind him, minimalist furniture in shades of charcoal and steel created a backdrop of understated wealth, the penthouse's clinical tidiness a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding on the screen. Two armed guards stood at attention near the private elevator, their presence as much a status symbol as a security measure in the young empire Dominic had built. He turned to address his right-hand man, a weathered veteran who had served the Russo family since before Dominic was born. "Find out everything about the woman holding him," he ordered, cold fury crystallizing his shock into dangerous purpose. "And get our people down there now." The older man nodded once, already making calls as he moved toward the private office adjacent to the main living space. Dominic returned his attention to the television, calculating eyes tracking every movement visible through the bank's windows, mentally mapping entry points and weaknesses in the police perimeter. He had not seen his estranged brother in over 2 years, not since their father's funeral had erupted into bitter accusations and threats. Alessandro had disappeared shortly after, along with his pregnant wife, both presumed dead after their car was found burned beyond recognition at the bottom of a ravine 3 months ago. Yet here was undeniable evidence that Alessandro's son had survived, now inexplicably in the arms of a stranger during an armed bank robbery. Dominic loosened his tie with a single fluid motion, his mind already formulating contingencies, identifying resources, pulling strings that extended into every corner of city governance and law enforcement. Blood called to blood, and whatever complicated history lay between the Russo brothers, the child was family. His family. And Dominic Russo protected what was his, no matter the cost. Within minutes, his security detail had the black SUVs ready, city permits expedited through channels that operated on influence rather than bureaucracy. He would personally oversee the extraction, using the considerable Russo resources to end the situation definitively. As he slipped on his tailored jacket, Dominic cast one final glance at the television screen, at my exhausted face as I cradled his nephew, and something unfamiliar flickered across his expression. Not merely calculation or determination, but something dangerously close to admiration. Hours into the standoff, the baby began fussing with increasing urgency, his small face reddening with the effort of communicating his discomfort. I knew that distinctive cry from my years in pediatrics. He needed changing. The lead robber, now deep in another round of hostile negotiations, waved dismissively when I indicated the situation, allowing me to move to a more private corner near the loan officers' desks. The other hostages watched with sympathetic eyes as I laid the baby on my jacket and rummaged through the diaper bag for supplies. The expensive bag was meticulously organized, containing everything a baby might need for a day away from home, suggesting a mother who was either extremely prepared or had deliberately packed for an extended absence. As I lifted out a changing pad, something about the bag's lining caught my attention, a slight unevenness in the otherwise perfect stitching. While pretending to search for wipes, I discreetly explored the anomaly with my fingers, feeling a small hard rectangle sewn into the seam. Heart racing, I carefully worked my nail along the threads until they gave way, revealing a matte black flash drive and a tightly folded note. With hands that suddenly felt clumsy with adrenaline, I tucked both items into my bra while continuing the diaper change with practiced efficiency. Only when the baby was clean and redressed did I unfold the note under the pretense of disposing of the soiled diaper, my blood turning to ice as I read the hastily scrawled message. "Keep him safe. They killed his parents." The words burned into my consciousness, confirming my worst suspicions while raising 100 new questions. This child was an orphan, deliberately placed in my care by someone who knew his life was in danger. The robbers weren't just after bank money. They were hunting this baby, this flash drive, this secret I now shared. I stared down at the innocent face looking up at me, those solemn dark blue eyes somehow knowing, his tiny fingers wrapping around mine with complete trust. "I won't let anything happen to you," I whispered fiercely, meaning it with every fiber of my being despite having no idea how I could possibly protect him from armed men or whatever powerful enemies had murdered his parents. Around us, the other hostages pretended not to watch, offering what privacy they could while the robbers remained distracted by their increasingly frantic phone conversations. Something was going wrong with their plans. Tensions were escalating as evening approached with no resolution. I secured the baby back in my arms, hyper-aware of the flash drive pressed against my skin, its weight insignificant compared to the burden of responsibility it represented. Whatever information it contained had cost 2 lives already and put a target on this child. As I rejoined the main group of hostages, I could feel the subtle shift in my own demeanor, from frightened nurse to determined guardian. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about protecting this child and the secrets he carried, no matter what came next. Night had fallen outside the bank, transforming the windows into black mirrors that reflected our haggard faces back at us in ghostly detail. Emergency lights cast long, distorted shadows across the marble floors, turning familiar objects into looming threats. The hostages had grown quiet as exhaustion set in, some dozing in uncomfortable positions against walls or desks, others staring vacantly into middle distance with the 1,000-yard gaze of prolonged trauma. I remained alert, despite my burning eyes and aching arms, the weight of the baby and the secret flash drive keeping me tethered to painful awareness. The robbers had grown increasingly agitated as their deadline approached, their carefully orchestrated plan clearly unraveling. I watched them confer near the vault, their hushed voices carrying just enough in the bank's unnatural silence for me to catch fragments that chilled my blood. "The boss said it would be with the kid," the shorter one hissed, gesturing in my direction while keeping his back turned. "We don't leave without it." "No sign of the mother," the leader responded, his posture rigid with frustration. "She must have passed it off already." The realization crashed over me with nauseating clarity. They weren't here for money. The bank robbery wasn't the goal, but the cover, a smokescreen to hide their true purpose. They had come for the baby, or more specifically, for whatever the child was carrying, the flash drive now burning against my skin like a brand. I thought of the note, the murdered parents, the woman's calculated handoff mere seconds before the attack began. This wasn't random bad luck. I had been deliberately placed at the center of something deadly. One of the robbers broke away from the group, stalking toward me with renewed purpose, his eyes hard behind his mask. "I need to check the baby," he said loudly enough for the other hostages to hear, maintaining the pretense that this was about controlling dangerous hostages rather than hunting for hidden information. No, I responded, clutching the sleeping infant closer. His finally settled. I can handle anything he needs. The robber leaned closer, dropping his voice to a threatening whisper. Listen carefully. If you have something that doesn't belong to you, now is the time to hand it over. The baby stirred against me, his small body tensing as if sensing my fear. I forced myself to meet the robber's gaze steadily, despite the terror coursing through me, understanding with crystal clarity that the moment I revealed the flash drive's existence would likely be our last. I have nothing except this child who needs protection, I said, infusing my voice with a confidence I didn't feel. The robber studied me for several long seconds before his radio crackled with an urgent message from his lookout, drawing his attention away. As he turned to respond, I noticed something new outside the bank, a subtle shift in the police formation, figures moving with coordinated purpose just beyond the perimeter lights. Something was happening, forces converging, and I was trapped at the center with an orphaned baby and information people were willing to kill for. The lead robber cursed violently at whatever he was seeing through the surveillance cameras, barking orders to his accomplices with increasing desperation. Something significant had changed outside, and I craned my neck trying to glimpse what was happening through the smallest gap in the blinds. The police barricade had shifted, creating an opening where a strikingly handsome man in his late 20s now stood conferring with who appeared to be the police captain. Even from this distance, his authority was unmistakable, the perfect cut of his suit and commanding posture causing officers to straighten involuntarily as he passed. I watched, transfixed, as he gestured toward the bank with precise movements, his expression professionally pleasant yet underlined with an intensity that seemed personal rather than procedural. Captain, you have a situation requiring specialized negotiation skills. I could just make out the words as they carried through the night air. My resources are at your disposal. The officers exchanged confused glances, some deferential, others resentful, as this newcomer effortlessly assumed control of their operation. He never looked away from the bank as he spoke, his focus unwavering, as if he could see through walls to where I sat, clutching the sleeping baby. A police lieutenant hurried to provide him with a tactical vest, which he smoothly declined with a subtle gesture that somehow conveyed both appreciation and dismissal. The command center had transformed with his arrival, previously methodical police procedures accelerating into something more dynamic and purposeful. The robber nearest the window swore under his breath, communicating something urgent to his leader through hand signals that sent them both into frantic activity, suddenly redistributing weapons and reinforcing the bank's entrance. They recognized the newcomer, I realized with a jolt of clarity. They feared him more than they feared the police. The baby stirred against me, somehow sensing the shifting energies despite his exhaustion. I adjusted him carefully, hyper-aware of the flash drive still hidden against my skin, my mind racing to connect these new developments to the note about his murdered parents. Whoever this strikingly handsome stranger was, his arrival had escalated the situation dramatically. The robbers were now checking ammunition with trembling hands, their previous confidence evaporating as they cast nervous glances toward the windows. Outside, the man had seamlessly integrated himself into the police command structure, officers now taking direction from him without question, tactical teams repositioning according to his quiet instructions. I had no way of knowing if this development improved our chances of survival or further endangered us. But one thing was unmistakable. The power dynamics had shifted, and the bank robbery that had never really been about money was racing toward its true purpose with me and the orphaned baby caught precisely in the middle. The main bank phone rang with an aggressive trill that cut through the tense silence like a blade. The lead robber answered it with obvious reluctance, his body language shifting from aggressive to defensive as he listened to whoever was on the other end of the line. Something about the caller had unsettled him profoundly, his eyes darting toward me and the baby with new urgency before he thrust the receiver in my direction. He wants to speak to the mother, he said. the emphasis on the last word making it clear he knew it was a lie. With no choice but to continue the charade, I took the phone with my free hand, balancing the baby against my shoulder as all eyes in the bank fixed on me with unnerving intensity. "This is Dominic Russo," came a voice of velvet-wrapped steel, smooth and cultured, yet underlined with unmistakable danger. "The child you are holding has a birthmark shaped like a crescent moon on his right shoulder." My breath caught in my throat as I carefully shifted the sleeping infant, peeling back the neckline of his tiny shirt to reveal exactly that. A perfect crescent-shaped birthmark that I hadn't noticed during the diaper change. How could this stranger know such an intimate detail? The implications sent my thoughts spinning as I stammered a confirmation, feeling the robber's suspicious gaze burning into me. The voice continued with controlled intensity, each word precisely chosen and heavy with meaning. "That child is my nephew," he said. "My brother's son. I understand you are not his mother, but right now you are his protector, and for that you have my gratitude and resources at your disposal." The baby remained surprisingly calm against me, despite the tension vibrating through my body, as if he somehow recognized the voice on the phone and found comfort in it. The lead robber moved closer, trying to overhear the conversation, his weapon casually visible as a reminder of who controlled the immediate situation. "I need you to trust me," Dominic Russo continued, seeming to sense my precarious position. "When the moment comes, follow my instructions exactly. Lives depend on it. Most importantly, that innocent child who by some twist of fate has been placed in your care." There was something in his tone, a certainty that commanded belief despite every rational instinct screaming that I should trust no one in this deadly scenario. I found myself nodding before realizing he couldn't see me, then managed a whispered agreement that felt like stepping off a precipice into free fall. "Good," he responded, the single word somehow both approval and promise. The connection between us solidified in that moment, transcending the phone line, the bank walls, the armed men watching my every move. This strikingly handsome stranger I had glimpsed only briefly through the blinds now represented either salvation or another deadly complication, and I had no choice but to gamble everything, including the baby's life and my own, on which it would prove to be. The bank phone rang again an hour later, its sound sharper somehow in the densely packed darkness that had settled over us as night fully claimed the city. The dimmed emergency lighting cast grotesque shadows across the marble floors, turning familiar shapes monstrous and alien. The robbers had grown increasingly volatile, snapping at hostages who shifted positions or made even the slightest sounds. One had struck an elderly man for coughing, the casual violence sending ripples of renewed terror through our exhausted group. When the lead robber thrust the receiver at me again, his hands were visibly shaking, pupils dilated with what might have been fear or amphetamines or both. I balanced the phone awkwardly, the baby miraculously still sleeping against my chest despite the tension vibrating through my body. "Ms. Ellis," Dominic Russo's voice came through with calm authority, establishing a pretense of formal distance for anyone listening. "I've been speaking with the pediatric specialist about your son's specific medical needs." My mind raced to catch up with this fiction, even as I felt the lead robber leaning closer, straining to hear both sides of the conversation. "I understand you're concerned about his formula," Russo continued smoothly. The skepticism that had been my constant companion through this ordeal warred with a desperate hope that this stranger might actually have a workable plan. "When I say his special formula is arriving, move away from the windows. Trust no one but me," he instructed, his tone leaving no room for questions or hesitation. Somehow I knew with bone-deep certainty that this was my only chance, that this man I had never met was the only force powerful enough to counter the increasingly desperate criminals holding us captive. "I understand his needs completely," I responded carefully, the coded agreement feeling like a lifeline thrown across a widening chasm. The lead robber yanked the phone away, barking his own demands into the receiver before slamming it down in frustration. Whatever Dominic Russo had said in response had clearly unsettled him further, his previous confidence crumbling visibly as he conferred with his accomplices in harsh whispers, punctuated by frantic gestures toward the exits. I clutched the baby closer, hyper-aware of the flash drive still hidden against my skin, understanding that we had now moved beyond a simple standoff into something far more dangerous. The robbers were cornered animals, their plan disintegrating, their mysterious boss likely demanding results they could no longer deliver. In such a volatile situation, hostages become liabilities rather than assets. Yet despite the escalating danger, I felt a strange calm settling over me as I visualized the strikingly handsome stranger outside, imagined the resources he was bringing to bear, the careful planning unfolding beyond these walls. I had thrown my lot in with Dominic Russo, a man who clearly operated outside conventional authority, yet commanded it effortlessly. Whatever came next would happen quickly, violently, and my only job was to protect this innocent child who had been thrust into my care through a cascade of tragic circumstances. I pressed my lips gently against the baby's forehead, silently promising him that I would not fail. The lead robber paced with increasing agitation, his earlier professional demeanor crumbling with each circuit of the bank floor. The other hostages had sensed the shift, their bodies tensing collectively when he suddenly stopped in front of me, ripping off his mask in a gesture of reckless abandonment. His face was unremarkable except for the cold calculation in his eyes, now fixed on the baby in my arms with naked intent. "Tell Russo we know who the kid is," he growled, no longer bothering with pretense. "His brother's brat. The flash drive is just a bonus." My blood froze as the pieces clicked into terrible place. This had never been a bank robbery, it had been a kidnapping disguised as one, targeting not just any child, but Dominic Russo's nephew, now orphaned according to the note hidden with the flash drive. The robber reached for the baby with rough hands, his patience clearly exhausted after hours of failed plans. "Don't touch him!" I snapped, surprising myself with the ferocity in my voice as I twisted away, shielding the infant with my body. The movement woke him, his dark blue eyes opening wide, remarkably calm despite the danger surrounding him. The other hostages had gone deathly still, the air thick with the understanding that we had crossed from standard armed robbery into something far more personal and deadly. "I know you have it," the robber hissed, his hand moving to my collar, searching for hidden items. "The flash drive with all those pretty pictures of Russo's operations. Our buyer pays double if we deliver it with the kid. Our buyer. More players in this dangerous game, someone powerful enough to set this elaborate trap, to murder the baby's parents, to target an innocent child as leverage against the strikingly handsome stranger coordinating rescue outside." The remaining robbers closed ranks around us, their previously scattered attention now focused entirely on obtaining the baby and the information I carried. Something changed inside me in that moment, fear crystallizing into unshakable resolve. I might not understand the complex web of family rivalries and criminal enterprises that had enmeshed us, but I understood with perfect clarity that I was this baby's only protection. He had been entrusted to me, first by his desperate mother figure and now by his uncle fighting to reach him from outside. The robber grabbed my arm with bruising force, trying to wrench the baby from my protective grip. In response, I did something that would have been unthinkable hours earlier, driving my knee upward with nursing precision, targeting vulnerable anatomy with calculated force. He doubled over with a strangled cry just as the bank phone rang with shrill urgency. "The special formula is arriving now," announced a calm voice audible even from a distance. Dominic Russo's coded signal. I clutched the baby tight and dove for the floor as the first flashbang grenade shattered the windows, showering the bank interior with glittering fragments of opportunity and danger. The world exploded into chaos as synchronized flash grenades detonated at every entrance, light searing through my closed eyelids even as I curled my body protectively around the baby. The bank's alarm system reactivated with deafening intensity, emergency strobes casting the smoke-filled space in surreal stutter frames of motion and stillness. I could hear shouting, gunfire, the controlled rush of tactical teams breaching from multiple points, while the robbers returned fire from increasingly desperate positions. My nursing instincts took over completely, mentally cataloging the baby's vital signs as I pressed him against my chest, his tiny heart racing but strong, his breathing rapid but unlabored despite the smoke now filling the bank. I army crawled toward what appeared to be the safest corner, dragging us away from the main confrontation, feeling glass shards slice through my pants into my knees, the pain distant and irrelevant compared to the imperative of keeping this child alive. Other hostages scattered in panic, some running toward exits now cleared by police, others flattening themselves against the floor as bullets struck marble surfaces, sending fragments ricocheting in deadly arcs. The lead robber was shouting orders that no one followed anymore, his careful plan disintegrating into primitive survival instincts. Through the chaos, a figure materialized beside me with impossible stealth, kneeling in one fluid motion to create a human shield between us and the gunfire. It was him, the strikingly handsome man from outside, Dominic Russo, his tailored suit incongruous amidst the tactical gear and weapons surrounding us. "Give me the child," he said, his voice somehow cutting through the cacophony with perfect clarity. His eyes, the same remarkable dark blue as the baby's, locked onto mine with an intensity that should have been intimidating, but instead felt reassuring, a fixed point in the maelstrom. I clutched the baby tighter, nurse instincts warring with the reasonable suspicion that this powerful stranger might be just another danger. "How do I know you're any better than them?" I challenged, surprising myself with the steady strength in my voice, despite the bullets flying mere feet away. Something shifted in his expression, a momentary crack in the perfect composure revealing raw grief beneath. "Because Alessandro died protecting him from me becoming exactly what you fear," he answered, the naked truth in his voice more convincing than any practiced assurance could have been. We locked eyes for one eternal second before I made my decision, carefully transferring the precious bundle into his waiting arms. The baby, who had remained eerily calm throughout the entire ordeal, reached up to touch his uncle's face with tiny fingers, a gesture of recognition that made the hardened man beside me visibly falter. "The flash drive," I said urgently, extracting it from my hiding place and pressing it into his hand alongside the child. He nodded once in acknowledgement, then suddenly lunged forward, knocking me flat as a final desperate shot from the lead robber whistled through the space where my head had been moments before. The blow to the floor sent darkness creeping into my vision, the world narrowing to a pinpoint of awareness before unconsciousness claimed me entirely. I woke in stages, consciousness returning in gentle waves rather than the harsh jolt that had marked my previous awakenings throughout the bank ordeal. Sunlight streamed through bulletproof windows, casting golden patterns across a room so luxurious it seemed to belong to another world entirely. The bed beneath me was cloud-soft, sheets with a thread count higher than my monthly salary, the quiet hum of advanced security systems providing a subtle soundtrack to my recovery. 3 days had passed since the raid, most of it spent in a fog of exhaustion and medical treatment for injuries I hadn't even realized I'd sustained during those terrifying hours. Now fully alert, I padded across plush carpet to the adjoining nursery where the baby, officially named Marco Alessandro Russo, according to the documents it'd been shown, slept peacefully in a custom crib that probably cost more than my entire apartment. The nursery was a fortress disguised as luxury, the innocent pastels and stuffed animals belying security features that could withstand military assault. I stood watching his tiny chest rise and fall, marveling at how completely this child had transformed my life in less than a week. A subtle shift in air pressure alerted me to another presence. Dominic Russo stood in the doorway, his striking features softened by the morning light, his usual aura of dangerous power temporarily muted as he gazed at his sleeping nephew. I had learned much during my recovery, piecing together the fragments of a tragic family saga through gentle questioning and overheard conversations. Alessandro, Dominic's younger brother, had fled with his wife after discovering corruption within the family business, taking evidence of criminal activities with him. Their deaths had been no accident, but Dominic had believed the baby lost as well, until fate and a desperate mother figure had placed him in my arms in that bank. "You kept him safe when his own blood couldn't," Dominic said, his voice low to avoid waking the child. "That creates a bond that can't be broken." "I had options," he had explained earlier. "A new identity, financial security, a fresh start far from the complications and dangers of the Russo family. A chance to return to my normal life, as if none of this had happened. But as I watched the baby sleep, peaceful for the first time since I'd met him, I knew there was no going back to before. The connection formed during those terrifying hours had rooted too deeply to sever." "Stay, Olivia," Dominic continued, something vulnerable flickering behind his carefully controlled expression. "He needs you. Perhaps we both do." I studied him, this strikingly handsome man in his late 20s who commanded an empire built on both legitimate business and shadowy enterprises. I understood exactly who and what he was, the danger he represented, the complicated moral compromises staying would entail. Yet I also saw how tenderly he watched his orphaned nephew, the fierce protectiveness that mirrored my own, the unexpected connection that had formed between us through chaos and shared purpose. My decision had been made long before he asked, perhaps in that moment during the raid, when I entrusted the baby to his care and he proved worthy of that trust.